this is only true here. This is no longer true. At least I think that's what I was hearing being said. This isn't true anymore. Right? Yeah, it's not true anymore. There is no one who is being given to the Father, being given by the Father to the Son, the way they were back then. I don't know what's changed, but it has something to do with John 12. And all men are now drawn.
Okay, you want to comment on that?
Has he read Romans 11? I mean, he doesn't know what's different now. The unbelieving Jews have been broken off, and the believers have been grafted in. That's what changed, Dr. White. There's a difference that goes on that Paul goes into, in Romans 9, 10, and 11, that God's people are no longer counted as such based on their ancestry, but rather by their faith. That's huge throughout the New Testament. There's no way you're not aware of that. You're just playing dumb at this point.
Now see, Flowers did this in the debate with Pastor Gabe. Flowers did something with, what was it? Who receive an invitation to the wedding, I think it was what it was. Something along those lines. It missed the relationship of present tense with the future tense. All that the Father is giving me will come to me.
Okay, this one was kind of geared toward me, so this is the debate slide that I used, and so I'll just show you what I did in the debate. I point out that no man can come to me. Udais, by the way, is literally no man because it's in the masculine. It's nominative, so it's referring to the noun, the subject of the sentence. So the man here in Udais is the subject of the sentence. Now he's going to make a lot to do about auton, him, the pronouns. But what is auton referring back to? And this is what I point out in the debate. I circle them and point out Udais is the man, and him is the pronoun. The pronoun him, auton, is referring back to the subject of the sentence, Udais, no man. And so he tries to tie this auton with this auton as if they're referring to each other and have to be interconnected, versus understanding that both of them are referring back to the subject of the sentence, the coming man. No one can come unless God does something first. And so that's the point that I made, and there's nothing grammatically which suggests one interpretation over the other. And I quoted from sources that say that. And so I used this analogy, which is what he's referring to, of a parallel sentence that helps you understand our position versus theirs. No man can come to the Son's wedding banquet unless the Father invites or enables him. And he, the man who comes, will have a great feast. So what's implied with the second auton, the second he there, is the coming man. Because even Calvinists believe he has to come once drawn. The Calvinists just assume that the reason he's referring to them as the coming man is because the drawing is effectual. But you can't assume that. You certainly can't support it by the grammar. And you also can't support it by the word helko either, because as we demonstrated in the debate, Nehemiah 9:30 in the Septuagint uses the same word helko, but yet the drawing there is not effectual. God draws them and that they resist it. And we give other verses where the word helko is used in that same regard. So that's what he's referring to, by the way, for those that are interested. Do you want to comment on that, David?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think it's very obvious that it assumes that the one who is raised up has come. But I mean, ultimately, to me, this has always been like a battle that I don't really care to fight, because I'm fine with just saying that it does refer to the same person. The issue for me is whether that person is drawn conditionally or unconditional. It's not whether the same him who is drawn is the one who comes. We agree that God is drawing to himself, a specific people here, and it's those who have been, who have listened and learned from the Father, right? Those who have been faithful. So there's just not an issue here, even if we see this drawing as effectual, because it's still not unconditional. And so I've always seen this as like, not that you can't fight there. I agree with you. I think that your interpretation there is correct and that White is overstating the case. But ultimately, that doesn't even seem to me to be the main, point of contention.
Right. And the reason I point out both of those, even though I take the interpretation and agree with you on the interpretation with regard to the lost sheep of Israel, he's calling people who believe in him, and that's the referent here. I point these things out because whenever the drawing is referenced later on in John 12, which we'll get to, and we do believe there's a different sense of drawing, which is interesting because he seems to later on accuse us of believing it's exactly the same drawing, when in reality we believe just the opposite. It's the typical traditional Arminian perspective that would say it's exactly the same drawing, and we would say no, he's not drawing all men to himself because he hasn't sent the gospel to be proclaimed in all the world so as to draw them into himself yet. He's actually speaking in parabolic language to keep the truth at bay, so to speak. He's not fully investing. In other words, he's telling people, don't tell anybody who I am yet. Mark 9:9, Matthew 16:20, and so many other passages where he says, hey, don't tell anybody, it's not the right time. In other words, and once I'm raised up, then I'll commission the gospel to go and thus draw all people to myself. I'll send the Holy Spirit to bring conviction to the world at that time, but I'm not doing that right now while I'm down here on earth, because I have a mission to accomplish through the rebellion of this people. And so it's ironic that he doesn't seem to understand our perspective well enough to even understand how we would interpret John 12, 32 in comparison to what the typical Arminian approach would do so. But the reason I point that out is just because it's an abuse of the grammar and the word helko to try to insist that there is an effectual, irresistible regeneration at play here. And that's the point I'm trying to show, that helko cannot be used to mean regeneration, given the way it's used in other places. And therefore it can't be seen as some kind of irresistible or effectual working of God to cause people to believe in him. All right, we'll jump back in here. Here we go.
And we're being told that, well, that's right now. But wait a minute. Who is being given to the Son? From the provisionist perspective, it's the choice meats. It's the people who are already worshiping God. So if we're being told in some way, shape, or form.
Okay, David, just real quick here, this just hit me, but he even believes there are people, obviously, who are choice, that are elect based upon Calvinism's belief of election. So people like Simeon, for example, or other God-fearing people who believed in the Father, he would say they were elect, unconditionally chosen before the foundation of the world, and made to be believers through some irresistible working. But wouldn't he also believe that those people, whoever they are, would also be drawn to the Son as well? Do you see what I'm saying? In other words, he's not getting away from this issue that has to be happening in this transitionary period, which, by the way, this word this transitionary period, that's MacArthur's usage in the sermon that I played not long ago, where he talks about this transitionary period of the New Testament, where he's bringing in God-fearing people who truly believe in the Lord into his covenant with him through the Son. That's his words, not mine. And so I think that's a universally used vernacular. The transitionary period of the New Testament seems to be a universal vernacular to say there is obviously something new and different happening during the New Testament when Christ is here on earth. And so it seems to me even Calvinists would have to have an answer to that issue. What do you think?
Oh, for sure. And like I said before, I don't think his disagreement with us is over the existence of these kinds of people, because it's very clear in the New Testament that they exist, right? I mean, you gave an example, as I listed off a whole bunch before. So it's very clear that you have this sort of transition that takes place. I think his argument with us is, his argument is really with himself about whether these people are better or not. And that's what he tries to make it all about. But again, we're not really saying that one is better than the other. The issue here is whether it's an unconditionally elected group of people. And that's like the point he does not want to go. He wants to focus on, are they better or not? And that just never has been your argument or mine.
Right. Yeah. Well said.
That this is only true here. This is no longer true. At least I think that's what I was hearing being said. This isn't true anymore. Right? Yeah, it's not true anymore. There is no one who is being given to the Father, being given by the Father to the Son, the way they were back then. I don't know what's changed, but it has something to do with John 12. And all men are now drawn.
Okay, you want to comment on that?
Has he read Romans 11? I mean, he doesn't know what's different now. The unbelieving Jews have been broken off, and the believers have been grafted in. That's what changed, Dr. White. There's a difference that goes on that Paul goes into, in Romans 9, 10, and 11, that God's people are no longer counted as such based on their ancestry, but rather by their faith. That's huge throughout the New Testament. There's no way you're not aware of that. You're just playing dumb at this point.
Yeah, and to say the way in which Peter, the Apostle Peter, related to the incarnate Christ and the way you and I relate to Christ is not different seems to be much more of a stretch than to try to suggest it's exactly the same, because I would love to have the Lord's Supper in person around a table with the incarnate Christ. That would be wonderful. But I didn't experience that. The reason the apostles had apostolic authority was because of their interaction personally with the Christ. In fact, that seems to be the basis throughout Scripture as to why we consider their writings to be more authoritative, right? And so if there isn't a difference, then we have something to worry about because your book might as well be inspired because, if it's all the same, if your interaction with the incarnate Christ is exactly the same as that of Peter's and Paul's and the other apostles who had personal interaction with the Christ, then why isn't our writings considered to be authoritative as theirs? And again, obviously, he would never say that. He would never believe that his writings or our writings are as authoritative as those of the apostles. But why, if there's not a clear distinction here? And even this is something, I won't take a lot of time here, but Peter gets into this in Acts chapter 10, where this is with his interaction with Cornelius. Verse 34, he says, opening his mouth, Peter said, I most certainly understand now that God is not one to show partiality, but in every nation, the one who fears him and does what is right is acceptable to him. Oh, they're choice meats. There's choice meats right there. Look, they fear him and do what is right, therefore they're acceptable to him, so they're choice meats. Because apparently to fear him makes you worthy of being saved, makes you better than everybody else. When, of course, on provisionism, that's not the case, because anybody can fear him. Anyone has the capacity, ontological capacity, to hear his truth, to fear him, and to do what's right and acceptable in his sight, given the grace that he provides for us to do so through revelation, through light, okay? Or prevenient grace, if someone wants to call it that, right? So there might be different ways in which we define what prevenient grace is. But because of God's grace, anyone can fear him and do what is acceptable inside of the Lord. On Calvinism, nobody can unless you were picked and made into a better person ontologically, i.e. regenerated, where now you have spiritual eyes to see, spiritual ears to hear. You can now do what's good and right. So you are choice meats in the quality sense. You are a better quality person than those who refuse to fear him, apparently on Calvinism. So I'm just pointing that out. Verse 36, the word which he sent to the sons of Israel, preaching peace. So notice who he sent the word to the sons of Israel, preaching peace through Jesus Christ. He is the Lord of all. You yourselves know the thing that happened through Judea, starting from Galilee, after the baptism which John proclaimed. You know of Jesus of Nazareth, how God anointed him with the Holy Spirit and with power, and how he went about doing good and healing all who were oppressed by the devil. For God was with him. We are witnesses of all the things he did. We are witnesses, so he's obviously talking about the apostles there. We are witnesses to the things he did both in the country of the Jews and in Jerusalem. They also put him to death by hanging him on the cross. God raised him up on the third day and granted that he would be revealed, not to all the people. So here's a limitation here. He doesn't reveal himself to all the people, but to witnesses who had been chosen beforehand by God, that is, to us, who ate and drank with him after he arose from the dead. And he ordered us to preach to the people and to testify solemnly that this is the one who had been appointed by God as judge of the living and the dead. All the prophets testify of him, that through his name, everyone who believes in him receives forgiveness of sins. So what is Peter pointing out here? There's a uniqueness to the apostles who met with Jesus in person, in the flesh. There's a uniqueness. He didn't choose to reveal himself to everybody. This is exactly what the priestly prayer in John 17 is about. When he prays, I don't pray for the world, but I pray for those you've given me out of the world, for they are yours. And then in verse 20 on, he goes on to pray for those who believe through their message. What's he doing? He's setting apart the apostles as special because they met with him, they talked with him, they were called by him. That is a distinction from us. And so for White to act as if there's no distinction between the people who related to Jesus incarnate versus how we relate to Jesus today seems to be a stretch that even goes beyond the Calvinistic Arminian divide, in my estimation, because it seems to hit on points that we shouldn't have in contention with each other, but seems to be that maybe White's bringing them as if they're points of contention, which actually should not be.